Number 1. A walk. Growing up, I had a best friend named Lloyd. We grew up as regular country boys, having all sorts of fun. We collected baseball cards together, we played with our toy guns, went to the pool, and did just about everything together. When my dad took me hunting for the first time, Lloyd came along. So growing up, we really did just about everything together. This happened when the two of us were in high school. Lloyd and I both lived off a rural route, way out of town. This was a very poor area, and we both lived in pretty old, run-down houses. This was also in the 1980s. We had grown up in the 70s and early 80s. My family was fortunate enough to have a color television, but we didn't have anything like cable. But this didn't matter too much to us kids, because most of the stuff we did was outside. It was a really hot summer night when this happened. Lloyd was over at my house, which was usual. We were both 16 years old at the time. We had been in my room listening to music pretty much all night. After a while, though, we had begun to get a little bored. Lloyd wanted to smoke a couple joints that he had on him. He thought that we could get away with it in my room, but there was no way I would let him. I wouldn't take the chance of my dad smelling it. I don't really know if we would have gotten in trouble for it or not, but there was no way I was going to take that chance. We lived right on the edge of a huge forest. It was a place that we had explored in, hunted in, hanged out in, and even smoked joints in before. I let Lloyd know that if he wanted to smoke, then we should probably go for a walk in the woods. It was already past midnight, but that was no big deal. We had often gone for walks really late at night. My dad was still awake and watching television. We let him know that we were bored. We were going to go for a walk. He didn't care, just told us to be careful, but just take a flashlight with us. He also suggested I take my rifle out with me, which I decided to do just to make him happy. This was back in the 1980s, and we lived in an extremely rural area, so it wasn't unusual for a kid my age to have his own gun. So we set out. We began smoking as soon as we got out into the woods. It was extremely dark outside, so we began using the flashlight right away. There were some paths to walk on, created by years of people simply walking through the big forest, and we just walked along them, deeper and deeper into the trees. For a while into our walk, it was just a normal walk. We didn't have anything happen, or hear anything out of the ordinary. But after a while, we noticed something lying off to the side of the path that we were walking on. When we got closer, we were pretty shocked by what we had seen. There was a dead deer lying on the ground. This in itself was not unusual, but it was cut up pretty bad. It was like some animal had killed it and mauled it a bit, eating a lot of it in the area that it was wounded in. What was weird, though, was that plenty of the edible parts of the deer were left over. It seemed strange to both of us that any animal would have done this, and left so much meat. Hey, what if we run into a bobcat or something like that did this? Lloyd asked me. I held up my rifle. That's what I have this for, I said. Don't misunderstand me, however. I wouldn't go looking for a bobcat to kill. But I would absolutely use my rifle to protect myself from one, however. We didn't think a whole lot about it, and kept walking through the woods and smoking. Except now we were listening to the noises around us more closely. We were talking about the possibility of a bobcat, and I guess the more we talked about it, the more we convinced ourselves that there might be one out there. However, we absolutely were not scared. I don't know how long we were out, or when we decided to turn around and head back toward my house, but we eventually did, and it was probably pretty late. We were probably pretty stoned at that point too, but not more than we were used to being. It was on the way back that Lloyd began getting a little paranoid. He kept telling me that he was hearing things in the woods. I wasn't hearing any of the noises that he described, and I told him he was just stoned. But he was confident that he heard something out there. He was confident that he heard something walking out in the woods. He began getting really worried that a bobcat or another animal was indeed out there and was stalking us. I, though, still didn't hear the noises that he was talking about. The more we walked along, the more paranoid that Lloyd got. He kept asking me, whispering over and over, "Did you hear that? Did you hear that?" And I still hadn't heard any of the things that he had been talking about. When we crossed back toward that area that we originally had seen the deer, we were surprised to see that it wasn't there. This just increased Lloyd's paranoia, and he began scanning the area, trying to see if an animal was dragging it off somewhere. "Holy shit," I heard him whisper, and he grabbed my arm. Lloyd made me look over into the woods, but he wouldn't shine the flashlight in that direction. Although it was dark, I could see what looked like a rather large figure out in the woods. It was moving, too. I grabbed the flashlight from him and shined it at whatever it was that we were looking at. We saw the deer, but whatever the big figure was that was obviously pulling it, it quickly got out of the way before we could see what it was. However, we had both seen it. For the first time, I was as scared as Lloyd was, or even more. I didn't know who or what we saw. But after what we remembered from seeing the deer, and then what we had seen in the dark, I knew someone or something was out there. To let them know that we were armed, I took my rifle and I shot one shot into the air. I was hoping that would scare whomever it was away. "We need to get out of here," Lloyd told me. I agreed, and the two of us began jogging along the path to get out of the woods. We were scared that anything that might have killed that deer and was pulling it away could be frighteningly dangerous. We just wanted to get as far away from it as possible. We weren't aware if it tried following us, but we got out of the woods as fast as we could. What we had seen was not very far from my house, so we both rushed into the house and locked the doors behind us. It was hot outside, and we usually kept the doors open, and they were always unlocked, so this was a rare thing. The two of us went and hid out in my room. We kept the gun out with us, fully loaded. We didn't sleep at all that night. I guess that shouldn't really be surprising. About a month later, a really big guy was arrested in the woods, not far from our house. Apparently, he'd attacked a police officer, who stopped to question him. I've no doubt that it was the same man that we saw. Number 2. Hike. I used to always enjoy taking my dog on a walk through the woods every day. I lived out in the country by myself. For the most part, when I took my dog for a walk, I would take him through the same area every time. However, one day, I decided to travel out in a completely different direction, and that resulted in me seeing the strangest thing I had ever seen in my life. It was nothing more than a decision made out of boredom, but I took my dog alongside the dirt roads, past the driveway, and then out into the hills that were opposite my house. Like my normal walks, we were out for a long time. We weren't hunting or anything, but my dog and I liked to take really long walks in the country as if we were. I didn't even have to leash him, as he never went too far from me, and always came back. Besides being a little more dense than the forest that we usually walked along in, this wasn't much different than that. We were having a good time walking through the woods and enjoying what we were seeing. My dog, I'm sorry I forgot to mention that his name is Roscoe, had been running around looking at things. He had beaten me over the top of the hill, and I was trying to get up there to check on him. But before I even made it to the top, he came running back over the hill to me. When he caught up to me, he turned and tried to lead me up the hill all over again. "Did you find something interesting, boy?" I asked him. Roscoe turned and began running back over the hill. I stepped up my pace and made it over the hill to see where he was going. Once I made it over the hill, I noticed something that really surprised me. There looked like there was an old cabin on the other side of the hill, and since Roscoe was over right by the cabin, I figured that was what he was barking about. I really didn't want to bother anyone who was living out in the woods like that. I knew better than to get involved with them, so I tried calling Roscoe over and over, trying to get him to come back to me. But for some reason he wouldn't. It wasn't unusual for him, however, to sometimes not come back to me when I called him. He could be a bit stubborn at times. I was very nervous when I walked up to him. He wasn't barking or anything, so it's possible that anyone living in the cabin hadn't heard him out there. So I did my best to be as quiet as possible, and I tried to go up to Roscoe so I could grab him by the collar and lead him away. As I got up to him, I looked over to the side of the cabin that I hadn't seen before. I noticed something really strange. There was a tree that was really close to the side of the cabin. Hanging from this tree were all sorts of shoes. They were all pairs of shoes, some of them in many different sizes. They all had their strings tied together, and then the strings were tied to different branches on the tree. Most of them looked like they had been up on the tree for a long time, beaten by the weather. However, some of the shoes in the tree looked like they were put up there more recently, and were not as weathered. All in all, it was the weirdest thing I had ever seen before. Also the most disturbing thing I had ever seen. I tried to be as quiet as I could, and I led Roscoe away from the area. I thought if I led him down the hill, we could get back to the road, and I could just take that home. As we kept going down the hill, though, I kept smelling something really nasty, and it just got worse and worse until we got to the bottom of the hill. And at the bottom of the hill, I saw the most disgusting thing I'd ever seen in my life. There was like a pile of what appeared to be rotted and decaying roadkill, or something like that, on the bottom of the hill. It was vile, and I had to do everything I could to keep from puking. I just had Roscoe by the collar, and I had to lead him away from it. We eventually got back to the dirt road. I used it, and took my dog home with me. I don't know what I actually saw that day. Between the weird shoe tree and the pile of roadkill, it was just the weirdest shit. But then again, a lot of times, if you go hiking where you're not supposed to, you will see the weirdest shit. Number 3. New neighbor. I inherited my parents' home when they both passed away when I was in my early 20s. I wasn't in a relationship and didn't have any children, so I moved in alone. It was a pretty big house to live in alone, but I didn't want to get rid of it or sell it or anything, so I stayed in it for quite a long time by myself. So I was a single female, living in a big house in town all by myself. My next door neighbors, or at least the ones who owned the house, didn't live there. However, they rented the house out to several people throughout the time that I had been alive. I had neighbors that I played with their children while growing up, and also had people who lived there who we never spoke to at all. And when I owned the house myself, not much changed. Well, about 2 years after I inherited the house, the people who rented the house next door moved out, and it stayed empty for about a month or so. When someone finally moved in, I came outside onto the porch to see who it was. I always liked to greet whoever moved in. Like my house, it was a big 3-bedroom, family-sized home, so I expected a family moving in. When I went over to greet the man who was moving in, I quickly realized that he was moving in all by himself. He didn't have a family moving in, and it wasn't surprising why. There was something very off and something very creepy about the guy that I noticed right away. He absolutely wasn't very talkative at all, and kept looking at me in a way that made me very uncomfortable. When I excused myself and went back to my home, I just decided this was not going to be one of the more friendly neighborhood relationships that I was going to have. But it didn't bother me because I figured that, like most of those neighbors over the years, he wouldn't be here forever anyway. So things just continued to be strange with him as the weeks passed. He wouldn't really talk to me, but if I came out of the house and he was on his porch, he would stare at me the entire time that I was outside. His eyes would follow me to my car and watch me as I drove away. I guess I should have worried about him breaking into my house and maybe stealing my stuff, but I never did. I could always tell from his eyes that this was not what was important to him. He seemed like he was interested in me for some reason. So after time, things kept up just like that. I came to the conclusion that he was pretty harmless. But not so long after that, I had seen him watching me from the windows of his house whenever he would catch a glimpse of me. That was much creepier than him just watching me from his porch, but I still tried not to think about it too much. Then one night, about 7 months after I moved in, I'd gotten home pretty late from work. I just wanted to have a couple glasses of wine and take a bath. I was doing a good job of finally relaxing after a very stressful work day. My bathroom was on the second floor of the house, so after I was done with my bath, I dried off and then put on my robe. I decided to go down to the second floor and get myself another glass of wine. I was walking around in the dark, like I normally do. I have very good night vision. I got the bottle out of the refrigerator and poured a glass, keeping the door open, and then I replaced the bottle inside. When the door was open, it faced the back of my house and blocked my back door. I closed it, and the kitchen, of course, went dark again when the light from the refrigerator went out. After the couple seconds it took for my eyes to adjust, I saw something out of the back window. It was only for a few moments, but I was sure of it. It was a man who was looking in the back window of my house. There was no doubt about it at all that it was my next-door neighbor. Then within a moment he was gone. I didn't scream or anything, but I did grab my phone and I called the police. I let them know exactly what I had seen. Well, I didn't have any proof that the man was at my back door, but in a moment of irony, I really didn't need it. The scariest revelation of my life also ended up being the thing that helped me. The police revealed to me that my neighbor was a convicted sex offender, but the reason they didn't need proof that he was at my door to arrest him was because he hadn't registered as one, even long before he had moved in. So he went to jail and was evicted as my neighbor. I was scared to death when I was told this by the police. It made me think of the possibilities with a person like that living next door. It was a good thing I caught him when I did. Number 4. Hi, my name is Rose. At the time of this story I was 18, and I'm a female. I lived in Oregon, and I went on vacation to Eureka, California, with my dad and stepdad. The first morning when we woke up in the hotel, I told my father that I wanted to go have breakfast at the buffet, and neither him or my stepdad wanted to come, so I went by myself. I walked to the buffet to get breakfast, and went to the tea and coffee area. And that's when I noticed this strange man staring at me when I was pouring my drink. And then I went back to my room and didn't think about the man being back in the hotel. Then I realized I forgot a spoon for my yogurt, so I headed out of my room for the last time. I went and got my spoon and headed back to my room when I noticed that the same man was staring at me in the gym doorway because my room was near the gym. When I went to turn around to put my key card into the key lock, I felt someone come up right behind me. So I turned around, and it was that man. So I asked if he needed something, because he wasn't talking. But then I noticed he was pointing down towards his privates, and to my disgust, he had his junk out. And then I sprinted away to the hotel laundry room, and thank goodness there was a staff member there. And I told them what happened, and I started crying out of fear, as I'm a victim of sexual assault in the past. The woman took me to the front desk, where they called the police. When the police arrived, he asked me a few questions, and they reviewed the footage. Then they told me, "Welcome to California. You should have kicked him in the balls, or threw your food at him." So the police were essentially useless and never found him. I really hope this man is in jail now, so I can't do this or worse to another woman. I know this isn't as scary as some of your other stories, but to me this was very traumatic, as it brought back PTSD. Anyway, thank you for reading this. P.S. I love your channel.
Hey y'all, Killer Orange Cat here. If you like this video, please let me know by hitting the like button. If you're not already subscribed to Killer Orange Cat, please feel free to click the subscribe button and bell below, or click the icon of Ichigo the cat that will appear at the end of this closing. Leave me a comment, and share this video with someone you think might enjoy it. If you have an original story you'd like narrated on Killer Orange Cat, please email it to the address included in the description. But most importantly, don't forget to make sure to check in your closet and check under your bed, because you never know where a Killer Orange Cat might be hiding. Good night.